Hello everyone, Dr. Colleen and Dr. Marc from Lifetime Wellness. Welcome to another live at 7:05. Tonight's is jam-packed. If you read the description, yes, prepare to have your lid flipped, your mind blown. I'm not kidding with that one. Tonight's is jam-packed. But first things first, please share this one. Share the fact that you're watching this, start a watch party, whatever you do in Facebook land. If you're watching this later after the fact on YouTube, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss these videos. Make sure you click the little bell so you're notified. I think you can do that on our Facebook page as well, so you get a notification every time we do one of these educational mini classes. Question of the day today ties right into our topic, so please answer in the comments with a yes or no. Have you had your insulin level checked? As in a laboratory test. Have you had your insulin level checked?
Fasting serum insulin.
Just write yes or no in the comments below. And then last thing before I head over to the other side of the camera tonight is hold on to your hat. This guy has so much information, and this is many days worth of material that we had to sort through to give you some of the highlights so you really get the point of how important this is, the things that you don't tend to hear in your conventional healthcare offices. So Dr. Marc's going to bring it tonight. Questions that you have that you need follow-up on, leave in the comments or privately message us, and we'll do our best to follow up with you and answer those questions. I'm going to field some questions during tonight's little seminar too.
So tonight, this is about every single one of you. This is not about a particular condition or a particular diagnosis. This affects every single one of us. So tonight we're talking about sugar or glucose and insulin. And I'm gonna be all over the map, I'm just telling you right now. So I got a bunch of stuff to share and it was kind of hard to figure out what not to include. So I'm just gonna bounce around and cover a lot of stuff, but hopefully you'll get the gist. In the beginning, I'm gonna mostly talk about glucose a bit to kind of get an understanding of that. And then we'll dive into insulin, because ultimately it's what contributes to virtually all chronic illness is high insulin and insulin sensitivity. And so getting that under control is really the game plan. But just want to start off with a couple statements to kind of get you in to listen to this, because insulin determines the rate of aging more so than anything else we know of. That's singular hormone. And your insulin sensitivity is going to determine, for the most part, how long you live and how healthy you're going to be. Okay, so this is how important this is. So we're going to talk about insulin. We're going to start off talking about sugar or glucose. And nowadays, we have such a problem with chronic illness and chronic diseases of aging. In large part because of the dietary changes that have been implemented going back to the early 80s with the onset of the initial food pyramid, which I'm going to show you here in a second. And so people nowadays are just consuming so much more sugar, and most of that in the form of refined carbohydrates. And when we talk about carbohydrates, we're really talking about fiber carbs or non-fiber carbs. There's really not a point in talking about complex versus simple carbohydrates. It's fiber and non-fiber. Fiber carbs are great. Those are vegetables. You can eat all the vegetables you want. It's the non-fiber carbs. We're talking about things like potatoes and other starches and breads and pastas and cereals and bagels and muffins and pancakes and waffles and crackers. Those are the refined carbohydrates that are too common in the American diet today. And so I want to kind of just give you some tidbits, some facts on sugar and glucose to kind of get a perspective of how and why this is so damaging, and even though on an average day you may not necessarily feel the effects of this, it happens subtly over time. But we talk about glucose, and it is an energy system in our body. Our body only burns two sources of energy: glucose or ketones, which come from fat. It's really the primary fuels that we have. But on an average day, you only have about a teaspoon, about 7 grams of glucose in your body, in your blood supply. Just a teaspoon. And you think about the average American consumes probably upwards of over 20 grams of sugar in their daily diet on an average day. I mean, just look at some of the products you can get at Starbucks, some of the drinks, loaded. What did we look at? It was a cookie the other day, Colleen?
Oh
Where
my
were we?
gosh.
73 grams of sugar. And this was at, well, I won't mention the name. I don't want to persuade anybody from not going there. In one cookie, like 73 grams of sugar. So, sugar was not intended or designed to be our main fuel source. It really is your turbocharger, which is why we have a little bit of it. So when we need that little extra boost, we can tap into our sugar. Right now, on an average day, you should be a fat burner. You should be burning fat for fuel, and then your body can just dip into glucose as needed. Your main source is stored fat, and the body takes that, the liver breaks it down into ketones, and your body loves that. It's a really clean fuel. Your brain really loves ketones. When we store glucose, we store it in the liver, in our muscles as glycogen. So a lot of you learned this, in early on chemistry or biology. You only have enough stored glucose to last you maybe one day. So if you think about it, if you're fasting, just fasting overnight, you're going to deplete your glucose and your glycogen stores just for organ function and different things like that. But the reason you don't die overnight is because you have fat that you can tap into. So it's there at any time, but a lot of people now are just surviving on burning sugar 24/7, 365, and never really tapping into their fat. So think of it this way. Your glucose in your body or your glycogen is really like a wallet. Money goes in and out easily, but a limited amount of storage. You can't store a whole lot. Fat is like your bank account. Little harder to access, but unlimited storage. So before getting money out of your bank account, you spend what's in your wallet. The problem is most people don't like an empty wallet. They get hungry, they have carb cravings because they're a sugar burner, so they never really get to tap into that bank account that has unlimited amount of surplus. So when we talk about blood sugar, we have a number of hormones in our body that can raise blood sugar. So when we need that turbocharger, we have actually some backup systems to help us dump glucose into our supply so that we can use it. Things like cortisol, human growth hormone, epinephrine, glucagon, hormones like that. We only have one singular hormone that causes our blood glucose to drop, and that's insulin. So when you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint or just a physiology standpoint, only having one hormone to do that means that it was not really expected to be used frequently. The other ones that we use a lot have backups, and so there's a redundant system there. So insulin really, it does some good things in the body. It's required for some hormone conversions, and of course, we're going to be accessing sugar, so we need to have insulin on the scene. But insulin is really referred to as like the bully on the playground. We do not want insulin on the scene that often, and we certainly don't want it in large numbers in the body. And so if you are, getting your insulin levels checked, we want to see that as low as possible, single digits. Under 5 would be great. A 2 would be awesome. There are people who are walking around with insulin levels in the 40s, 60s, 90s, and that's when it really starts to do more damage in the body. So insulin is ultimately a storage hormone. And so as a storage hormone, you eat sugar, we're going to store that in the cells. It's going to get pushed out of the bloodstream into your cells so that your cells can use it to make ATP and energy. When those get full, it's going to start to store the sugar in your muscles and your liver as glycogen. And when those cells get full, it's got nowhere else to put it. It's going to store sugar as fat. It's going to combine it with triglycerides, or actually it's going to form it with fatty acids to make a triglyceride, which is a saturated fat, and store it in your fat cells. Each of those different cells, your regular, human cells, the liver cells, the muscle cells, over time can become insulin resistant, really as a protective mechanism, because all that sugar is very toxic and becomes damaging. So they'll really change their receptor status and become a little insulin resistant. Fat cells take a little bit longer, but once that happens, now you start to store it as organ fat, typically in the liver and the pancreas. And that's another big function of fructose. An overconsumption of fructose automatically will lead to a fatty liver. So that includes like high fructose corn syrup. But this is another reason why, people who are just pounding fruit all the time, we're always like, oh, time out, time out. You don't want all that fructose going in, because that automatically just leads to fatty liver disease, or increases your risk for fatty liver disease. So we have the storage hormone, and this is one of the reasons why if people are, consuming what's considered a healthy, moderate diet that includes a lot of grains, they're going to really struggle with burning fat or losing weight, because insulin is there storing it as fat all the time, and it's impossible to burn fat or use fat if insulin is on the scene, because you're just going to be constantly burning sugar. Well, some other things, insulin helps to store other nutrients, things like magnesium. Well, if you have moved into a state of insulin resistance and you're not maintaining magnesium, one of the biggest benefits of magnesium is it relaxes smooth muscle. And so if you don't have that, you can have higher blood pressure just by a lack of magnesium. Another thing insulin does is it causes us to retain sodium. And sodium will lead to fluid retention. And then that can contribute to high blood pressure and also even congestive heart failure. Very common that you see type 2 diabetics with congestive heart failure and on blood pressure medication. Another thing that's really specific to insulin is insulin will cause endothelial proliferation, meaning like tumor growth. And this happens very commonly in the arterial vessels in the walls. Interesting, a guy kind of discovered this by accident. He was doing a diabetic study, and they were using dogs, and they were injecting insulin, and it was a femoral artery in the leg of the dog, and they were injecting it, and within just a few weeks, it was something like 70% occluded just in that artery they were injecting it. The other side was totally clear and fine. It was just the contact of insulin on the arterial walls that caused basically a tumor growth. So now you can end up with blocked arteries. So just a few examples of some of the negative things of having constant high insulin levels, and then more so developing insulin resistance. And one other little interesting thing to point out, or that vitamin C and glucose are virtually identical molecules. In fact, animals that can make vitamin C, they make it from glucose. We don't as humans, so that's why we have to ingest vitamin C. But because they're similar molecules, they compete for the same receptor sites, particularly in immune cells, phagocytic cells. So they'll use the same sort of entryway or doorway to get into the cell to help the cell function better. Well, there's something known as the phagocytic index, and that's really, it tells you how rapidly a macrophage or a lymphocyte can gobble up a virus, a bacteria, or even a cancer cell. So it's a measure of how strong and how fast your immune system can kill these things. Well, if your blood sugar is 120 or higher, it's been shown to reduce your phagocytic index 75%. So imagine if you have higher blood, glucose levels chronically, your immune system is going to be so inefficient, and not only bacterial infections and viral infections, but we're also talking about killing cancer cells. So this ties into, obviously a lot of things that people are dealing with. So what else we got here? So I want to kind of go back a little bit to where a lot of this started. And basically 1980, the FDA came out with the initial food guidelines for Americans, and this is when they demonized fat, especially saturated fat, and they recommended everybody eat a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. And if you remember, this is a kid version here. It might be backwards on the camera tonight, but the original food pyramid came out, and the whole base of the food pyramid was eat more breads and cereals and pastas and potatoes, the precise foods that cause elevations in blood glucose and insulin. And it was like 6 to 11 servings of this a day. Well, let me ask you a question. What is the minimum daily requirement for carbohydrates? Big fat, 0. It is not an essential nutrient. There's no essential need for carbs, especially non-fiber carbs. So they're not required, they're not needed. The more of those you eat, the worse your health is going to be. So, where do we go here next?
So much to choose from.
I know. So the biggest problem that results from the overconsumption of refined carbohydrates and sugar is elevations in insulin. Insulin drives storage of fat and fatty organs. There's a lot of other effects insulin has, but it is really the ultimate aging hormone. We talk about, you know, anti-aging things like human growth hormone and stem cell production. Insulin is the ultimate aging hormone. It's actually considered a mitogenic hormone, meaning it's going to cause your cells to replicate faster. Has big implications in cancer. Cancer is cells that are rapidly replicating, kind of out of control. So insulin plays a role there. And we talk about diabetes, meaning you get to the point where your blood sugar levels, you know, over 125 or 126, whatever the number is, they change it randomly. Typically, you're going to end up taking medications to lower your blood sugar, eventually ending up on insulin. And I want to talk about this a little bit, and I have a full-on video on our website on type 2 diabetes more specifically, and we dive into that in detail. But I think this is important. Sorry?
What's our website?
Our website is lifetimewellness.net, and you can see a type 2 diabetes tab there, and you can watch that video. But it's really frustrating because diabetes is on a rapid increase. It's on epidemic proportions. Somewhere around 50 million Americans have diabetes. Probably the same, if not higher amount, are pre-diabetic, many of which who don't even know that and aren't, you know, doing anything about it to reverse it. We've got a big problem on our hands when we have a third or a half of our country who are going to be dealing with diabetes. Terrible disease. You do not want this. But I want you to think about this. Type 1 diabetes is, people are typically born with this. It can be developed later on, but a lot of people are born this way, and they just don't produce enough or any insulin. So whether it's a damaged pancreas or something that happened, they don't produce insulin. So they are given insulin, which for them is life-saving. So they're doing regular insulin injections because they can't produce any. So now you have a type 2 diabetic who has high blood sugar and high insulin. And how do they treat them? With insulin. So type 2 diabetes is a hyperinsulinemia issue. It's too much insulin. And these people are so full of sugar that's the problem. It's too much sugar and too much insulin, yet they're treating them as if they were a type 1 diabetic. Doesn't that sound a little off? And in fact, if you give a type 1 diabetic too much insulin, they could develop type 2 diabetes, and it's called double diabetes. How's that? So the solution here is to get the blood sugar down, but more importantly, to get the insulin down. And what's unfortunate is no one is checking your insulin levels. We do blood work here, you know, when we're doing functional nutrition work with people, we've got a lot of labs that we can, you know, look at different markers, and insulin is one of those really important ones that needs to be looked at. You can measure your blood sugar levels all day long, and if you're on diabetic medications, your blood sugar might actually look normal and look healthy, but your insulin levels can still be sky high. You've got to look at those because that's the ultimate bad guy is elevated insulin and insulin resistance. So diabetes really just terribly mismanaged, and it's purely 100% lifestyle and diet related. You can reverse type 2 diabetes in a matter of weeks. It doesn't take long. It's actually the solution is rather simple. The diet, it's not difficult, but it literally will save your life and turn those numbers around and get them corrected. So if you're interested in getting checked, maybe your doctor won't run certain blood work for you, or you haven't had any blood work done in a while, give us a call. We do this on a regular basis, and we can interpret it for you and help you, with proper dietary guidelines and nutrition guidelines and all that kind of stuff. So I know there's a lot we covered here tonight, but this again is something that affects every single one of us, and it's something you can get control of very quickly with the right kind of guidance, right kind of coaching. So
wait, there is one thing I want you to say.
There's one more thing here.
Yeah, I think it's in your notes. Talk about the progression, the predictable progression. If you don't get insulin under control, how it moves.
Well, so typically what's going to happen is if you follow the standard American diet, too much sugar, too many refined carbohydrates, you're going to move to high glucose levels, high insulin levels. You're going to progress to insulin resistance. That's going to progress to type 2 diabetes. Eventually may become insulin-dependent diabetes. That's going to move on to chronic disease like heart disease, kidney failure, even moving on to cancer and Alzheimer's. And in fact, in today's literature, they're referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes because it's a glucose and insulin issue that has now reached the brain. The brain cells have started to become resistant to insulin as well. So not a pretty picture there. You don't want to go down that road. But again, simple solutions can turn this around pretty quickly and do it very safely as well. Anything else?
Yeah.
You want to come over and wrap it up?
So if you watched last week's live at 7:05, we talked about intermittent fasting and therapeutic fasting, and we were talking about how important it is to get sugar and insulin under control. And if you remember Dr. Marc saying, but we're not going to get into it tonight, this is why. This is a huge subject.
Well, this was just scratching the surface too, just to keep it short.
But it is significant, absolutely significant. It applies to absolutely everyone who eats food, not people like he started off with, just if you've already been diagnosed with something. It's definitely time for you to get on this. But seriously, if you eat, you need to know this information. So please share.
And if you want some help getting this under control, reach out, contact us, we'll help you.
Yep, I'll put our contact information below, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, ciao.